All right, buckle up, everyone, because today we're going on a deep dive into the world of atoms.
Yeah, get ready to explore the tiny particles that make up, well, pretty much everything.
Everything, huh? So like my phone, this table, even us.
That's right. Atoms are like the fundamental building blocks of the universe. They're in the air we breathe, the food we eat, absolutely everything.
So it's like atoms are the Legos of the universe.
You could think of it that way. Except these are like superpowered Legos with their own unique set of rules. We're going to break down those rules today so you'll walk away understanding a little more about the universe at its smallest level.
Okay, I'm ready to get building. But first, maybe we should start with the basics.
Yeah.
What exactly are atoms made of?
So picture an atom like a tiny bustling city. In the heart of it, you've got the nucleus, that's like the city's downtown area.
Okay, the nucleus is downtown. Got it.
Now, the nucleus is made up of two kinds of particles, protons and neutrons. Protons have a positive charge, kind of like a little plus sign.
I knew.
Neutrons are neutral, they have no charge. Think of them as like Switzerland, just chilling out in the middle of everything.
Okay, so protons and neutrons are hanging out downtown in the nucleus. What else is going on in our atomic city?
Well, buzzing all around the nucleus, kind of like those food delivery scooters zipping through traffic, are electrons.
Electrons, okay?
Yeah, and these tiny guys have a negative charge, and they're constantly on the move, whizzing around the nucleus.
So I'm picturing protons and neutrons chilling downtown in the nucleus, and electrons are like that blur of scooters going everywhere in the city.
That's a pretty good visual, yeah.
Yeah.
Although it's important to remember that atoms are actually mostly empty space. It's mind-boggling how much empty space there is.
Whoa, hold on. Mostly empty space.
Mm-hmm.
But if that's true, why doesn't everything just pass through each other? Like, why does my hand stop when it hits the table? It doesn't just go through it.
That's an awesome question. And it has to do with the forces at play between these tiny particles, but maybe we'll get into that a little bit later. For now, how about we talk about how scientists actually figured all of this out?
Yeah, it's not like we can just stick an atom under a microscope, right?
Nope, they're way, way too small for that. Figuring out the structure of the atom took centuries of scientific detective work. Like one scientist would build on the discoveries of the scientists before them.
So walk us through this atomic detective story then. Where do we even begin?
Well, let's rewind back to the early 1800s. A scientist named John Dalton, he thought of atoms as these solid, indivisible spheres, kind of like tiny marbles.
Atoms as marbles. Okay, simple enough.
Simple, but not quite right. Later on, in the late 1800s, a guy named J.J. Thomson, he discovered the electron. That was huge.
So Thomson discovers the electron, then what?
Well, he comes up with a new model of the atom. Now, he pictures it as this positively charged sphere, but with electrons scattered throughout, like raisins in a pudding.
Plum pudding atoms. Sounds delicious, but probably not the most accurate, huh?
You got it. The plum pudding model wasn't the whole story either. The real game changer was in 1911 when Ernest Rutherford did his famous gold foil experiment.
Okay, the gold foil experiment. That rings a bell, but I need a refresher.
So picture this. Rutherford and his team are firing these tiny particles called alpha particles. Think of them like bullets, and they're shooting these bullets at a super thin sheet of gold foil.
They're shooting bullets at gold. Sounds expensive.
Well, it was all in the name of science. And they thought most of these bullets would just pass right through, because back then they thought atoms were mostly empty space with those electrons scattered around like in Thomson's plum pudding model.
So did the bullets go straight through?
Well, most did, but to everyone's surprise, some of those alpha particles actually bounced straight back as if they hit something solid. That was totally unexpected.
That is wild. It's like if you were throwing tennis balls at a curtain and you expected them all to go through, but then a few bounce right back at you.
Yeah. Exactly. It was a groundbreaking discovery. It meant there was something dense and positively charged right at the center of the atom. They called it the nucleus.
So we've gone from marbles to plum pudding to now a model with a nucleus at the center. I'm guessing the story doesn't end there.
Of course not. There are always more discoveries to be made. Just a few years later, in 1913, a physicist named Niels Bohr, he added another layer to our understanding of the atom. He said that electrons don't just randomly orbit the nucleus. Instead, they occupy very specific energy levels, kind of like they're on different floors of a building.
So instead of just flying around wherever they want, electrons have their own designated zones.
Precisely. Imagine each electron having its assigned energy level, almost like an address in the atom.
Okay, that's starting to make more sense. But I'm sure there are even more twists and turns to this atomic tale, right? So last time we left off with Niels Bohr's model of the atom. where electrons are hanging out in these different energy levels, like on different floors of a building.
Right, but as always with science, the story doesn't end there.
Oh, I figured there had to be more to it.
Yeah, Bohr's model, it was groundbreaking for its time, but as scientists dug deeper, they found that the world of electrons is a lot fuzzier and less predictable than, electrons orbiting in neat little paths.
Fuzzy electrons.
Ah,
Feels like my hair in the morning.
good one. But yeah, instead of those fixed orbits that Bohr proposed, it turns out that electrons exist in what we call a cloud of probability.
A cloud of probability. Okay, now I'm really curious.
So it's not like we can pinpoint the exact location of an electron at any given time,
We can't. Why not?
because it's more about the likelihood of finding an electron in a particular region, not a specific point.
Okay, so you're saying we can't know exactly where an electron is, but we can sort of guess where it might be.
Exactly. Imagine trying to track a hyperactive puppy running around your house. You can't say for sure where the puppy is at every single second, but you can make a pretty good guess about the rooms where it's more likely to be.
Okay, I can picture that. So we have this cloud of probability where electrons might be hanging out. What does that actually tell us about how atoms behave?
Well, that's the cool part. This fuzzy, uncertain nature of electrons, it's actually the key to understanding how atoms bond with each other to form molecules.
To form molecules, right? Molecules are like those combinations of atoms that make up everything, like water and DNA, right?
You got it. The way those electrons interact, it determines how atoms bond together to create the incredible diversity of matter we see in the universe.
Okay, so even though this fuzziness sounds kind of, I don't know, abstract, it's actually really important.
Absolutely. It's at the heart of chemistry and how the world works at a molecular level.
So we've talked about these fuzzy electrons, and before that we talked about those protons and neutrons hanging out in the nucleus. Anything else surprising going on with those guys?
Yes. Actually, there's another layer to this atomic puzzle. Atoms of the same element, they can have different versions of themselves. We call those isotopes.
Wait, different versions of the same element? What does that even mean? Like, how can you have different versions of, say, carbon?
Think about it like different models of a phone. They all have the same basic features, but, some might have more memory, a better camera, maybe a slightly different design.
Okay, I'm following you.
So isotopes of an element, they have the same number of protons, which is what defines the element, but they can have a different number of neutrons.
So it's like they're all carbon atoms, but some are heavier than others because they've got extra neutrons?
Exactly. Now, here's the thing. Some of these isotopes, they can be a bit unstable. It's like they have a bit too much energy packed into their nucleus. And to become more stable, they go through something we call radioactive decay.
Radioactive decay. That sounds a bit, dangerous. What happens during this decay?
Imagine you're holding a balloon that's filled with way too much air. Eventually, the balloon just can't handle all that pressure, right? And what happens? It starts to leak air.
Yeah, pop.
Well, it could pop, or maybe it just slowly leaks. Either way, it's releasing some of that pressure to become more stable. Radioactive decay is kind of like that. The unstable nucleus releases energy and particles to try and reach a more stable state.
Okay, I like that analogy. So what kind of energy and particles are we talking about here?
Well, there are a few different types of radioactive decay, each with their own sort of fingerprint. One is alpha decay. That's when the nucleus ejects a particle called an alpha particle, which is basically just two protons and two neutrons stuck together.
So it's like the nucleus spits out a tiny piece of itself?
Yeah, kind of like that. Then there's beta decay. This time, a neutron in the nucleus actually transforms into a proton, and in the process, it spits out an electron, which we call a beta particle.
Wow, so it's like a shape-shifting neutron.
I like that.
Very creative.
And then finally, you have gamma decay. In this one, the nucleus releases energy in the form of high-energy waves called gamma rays.
Gamma rays, like the stuff that gives superheroes their powers.
Huh? Well, maybe not quite. But they are pretty powerful. Think of gamma rays like supercharged light waves.
Okay, so radioactive decay, it sounds kind of scary and all, but can it be used for good?
Absolutely. While uncontrolled radiation is definitely dangerous, scientists have found all sorts of incredible ways to harness it safely for really important applications.
Okay, yeah, let's name.
One amazing example is in medical imaging. Doctors can inject or have patients swallow tiny amounts of radioactive isotopes and then track how they move through the body using special equipment. This can help them see how different organs are functioning and even diagnose diseases.
So it's like having tiny radioactive spies inside your body, helping doctors see what's going on.
Precisely. And another important use is in radiation therapy. High-energy radiation, often gamma rays, can be used to target and destroy cancer cells.
So it's like a microscopic laser beam zapping those unwanted cells.
Exactly. It's an incredibly powerful tool in the fight against cancer.
It really is amazing how we can use these tiny atoms and their radioactive powers for things like that.
It's pretty mind-blowing, right? And, we're only scratching the surface of what's possible. There are even more incredible ways that we can harness the power of the atom. But maybe that's a story for another time.
All right, so we've explored the structure of atoms, those fuzzy electrons, and even those shape-shifting isotopes. But now I'm ready to go full-on sci-fi. Let's talk about how we unlock the ultimate power of the atom.
You mean things like nuclear fission and fusion? Those are the processes where we're talking about massive amounts of energy released from the atom's nucleus, the kind of energy that powers stars.
Exactly, fission and fusion. It sounds like something straight out of a superhero movie.
Well, they're pretty epic processes. Let's start with fission. Imagine you've got this giant Jenga tower. Fission is kind of like pulling out the wrong block, and the whole tower collapses in this spectacular chain reaction.
Okay, I can picture that. But instead of a Jenga tower, we're talking about the nucleus of an atom, right? What's the block we're pulling out in this case?
In nuclear fission, the block is a neutron. When a neutron hits the nucleus of a large, unstable atom like uranium, it splits that nucleus into smaller fragments, and that releases a tremendous amount of energy.
Okay, so it's like a domino effect, but on an atomic level. And this is how nuclear power plants work, right?
You got it. They use controlled fission reactions to generate heat, which is then used to produce electricity.
It's a pretty amazing source of energy, but of course it comes with some risks too, right? Like potential meltdowns and the issue of radioactive waste.
Yeah, definitely. There are pros and cons to everything, right? Nuclear power is no different. But for now, how about we move on to fusion?
Okay, fusion. What's that like?
Well, fusion is like the opposite of fission. Instead of splitting atoms apart, we're merging them together. Imagine you take two tiny magnets and you try to force them together. You know how they resist at first? But then when they finally connect, they release a burst of energy.
So it's kind of like squeezing those water balloons together until they finally pop and merge into one.
That's a great analogy. In nuclear fusion, we're basically forcing two light atomic nuclei, like those of hydrogen atoms, to combine and form a heavier nucleus. And a ton of energy gets released in the process.
And this is what happens in the sun, right? Like
Yeah.
the sun is one giant fusion reactor.
Exactly. The sun is constantly fusing hydrogen atoms into helium, which is why it's able to give off so much light and heat.
So if we could figure out how to control fusion here on Earth, we'd basically have a clean, limitless source of energy, right?
That's the dream. Fusion has incredible potential, but it's also super challenging to achieve.
Yeah, so.
Remember those magnets we were talking about? Well, imagine trying to force together two magnets that are like 1,000,000 times stronger, and you have to do it at temperatures hotter than the sun.
I see what you mean. Fusion sounds pretty tough to pull off, but it definitely seems like it would be worth it.
Absolutely. If we can crack fusion, it would be a total game changer.
Wow, this has been a pretty wild journey. We've gone from the basic building blocks of atoms to, those fuzzy electrons, and now all the way to the processes that power the stars.
Yeah, it really shows how much there is to explore in the world of atoms and subatomic particles.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. I hope you all learned something new today and maybe even sparked a little bit of curiosity about the universe, both the one within us and the one all around us.
And remember, folks, keep exploring, keep asking those questions, and never stop learning.